Welcome back as we finish our analysis of Act 2, Scene 2, this super climatic scene, and it doesn't get more climatic than the end. There's a lot to go over, so let's begin. First of all, Chance's interaction with Heavenly is first heralded by Boss's entrance, and we see how his public persona is really amplified here. He comes in with the sirens, there's bright lights, so clearly he wants to show everyone that he has made an entrance. Yet, Williams also wants to emphasize that the attention here should really be on Chance. A hot light is on him. This is his moment of reckoning where he's going to come face to face with the person he's injured the most, Heavenly, and the person that has made it the most difficult for him to achieve his dreams, which are Boss. Once again, Boss's public persona very much on. William lays it out thickly there, and you can see why he so desperately wanted Heavenly there to project this pure image. He's laughing to the photographers and the reporters, bringing up his daughter. Ain't she Heavenly? Ain't that the right name for her? Making these puns about her jokes when the audience knows that she's writhing inside. She cannot stand all this public attention, all this hypocrisy, all this facade. So she runs away and then she enters. All right, up to this point, all the sounds of Boss were off stage. So we see her run in and she sees Chance. She sees him, but they remain distant. She's on the steps. He's on the steps leading to the Palm Garden while she's in the cocktail lounge, the entrance into the bar. So that distance is symbolic of how they cannot really be united. And to the audience's great frustration, they don't say anything. They just look at each other because after everything that's happened between them, there's no right words to make up that gap between them. And then all of that inferred aggression that we saw in Boss before comes into the forefront again. He seizes her by the arm. He wants to hit Chance and the heckler with the cane. But because there's reporters and photographers, he holds himself back, just like he did in Act 2, Scene 1 when Charles entered the veranda when he wanted to restrain Heavenly forcibly. So that has remained consistent in his character throughout. Now we also see Tom Jr.'s own aggressive behavior. He comes in rushing forward. People have to physically restrain him. And this scene is so pivotal to understanding why, because backstory is given that has a few surprises in store. Chance is playing it off. He's acting like the big man. What's all this about? But he is standing his ground, and we have to give him credit for that. He says that when he was younger, I used to leave places when I was told to. So the young Chance, the Chance that felt insecure about not coming from money, would follow the norm, would follow the status quo and leave. He's going to stand his ground now. So that does show some courage on his part when he's so vastly outnumbered. And he also wants to make it clear that St. Cloud is his town. This is his place for salvation. He's not just going to give it up. And he wants to make sure that he contrasts himself with Boss. Boss came down to preach hate, and he was born here to make love. It's a little over the top and grandiose kind of a statement, but there is some truth in the difference between him and Boss. We've heard Boss give his voice of God speech, like Heavenly calls it, this egomaniacal Jesus kind of speech he gives, and yet it's rife with racism and hypocrisy. So there is a big difference between them. And we notice that just like with Boss, Tom holds himself back from doing bodily harm to Chance in public because of the fact that this is going to be televised. So both the Tom Sr. and the Tom Jr. very much think of their public image at all times. What I find most interesting about their interaction is that we find out that Chance and Tom were actually friends. So back in high school, early 20s, they were friends, and Chance almost saw him like a protege, as a younger man, even though they were probably the same age, that he had to mold into something great. So for example, he lent him money to go to a baseball game. He lent him money to go to the movie theaters. He lent him his motorcycle. He got a date for him. So he's trying to remind him in this belittling tone that I did all these things for you. How could you possibly be upset at me? Because whatever else he's done, he claims he never hurt Heavenly. And he uses the word, I swear. So the tone here must be really earnest and really, really, really serious. Tom Jr. scoffs at that. How could you say that? Are you saying somebody else diseased my daughter? We've heard this throughout the play, that Chance has corrupted Heavenly in some way, and it is here that it finally becomes explicitly clear. Now remember, there is some doubt because Aunt Nani in Act 2, Scene 1, when she was talking to Tom Jr. and Boss, she kept saying it wasn't Chance who... Heavenly says it wasn't Chance. She got cut off. What that means, we don't know. It wasn't Chance who took those pictures of me or had them copied, or is she talking about it wasn't Chance who corrupted me? Tom doesn't believe it. Tom blames Chance wholeheartedly, and he lays out the story. So as Chance was being a gigolo, one of the women he was a gigolo to was a woman named Minnie, who was from Texas, had a lot of money. And so he would spend the weekends with her in New Orleans on her yacht and would get money from her, and then on the weekdays come back to St. Cloud and spent the money with Heavenly. Chance doesn't deny this, so it seems like it was true, and it does make the audience kind of gasp and reconsider everything they thought they were gaining in sympathy for Chance, because if this was true, this is a whole other level of deception. It's one thing to be in New York and having been a gigolo and then come for a few months to be with Heavenly. It's a whole other thing if it was all happening simultaneously. And then what Junior is trying to explain is that from that woman who also slept with other gigolos, Chance contracted an STD, and then he passed that STD on to Heavenly. Notice he calls her my little sister who never heard of such a thing. So he's really painting her as an innocent woman. And I think Williams is telling us there's truth here because stage directions, the lamentation is heard. Remember, the lamentation is a song that one of Tennessee Williams' good friends and writer wrote for him, particularly for this play. And it always evokes a sense of regret or remorse for something done in the past. So usually it's affiliated with Chance, although Princess has heard it as well. So clearly Williams is indicating this is Chance's moment of realization of his true crime, everything that he did. And he does seem to admit, I left town before I found out. Did he find out he had his STD, but after the fact, and thought that maybe it didn't happen while he was with Heavenly? It's totally possible. But he had written it off thinking, well, she never wrote me. And kind of like Bud did earlier in the scene, Tom Jr.'s like, how could she write you? You don't have a permanent address. But he puts it in terms that are much more pejorative. There's no addresses or phone numbers in the gutter. You're trash. You belong in the gutter. There's no way she could have contacted you there. Also notice the way he describes the operation that's been mentioned from the very start. He compares it to what you do to animals. You spay and you neuter them. You spay and neuter cats and dogs so that they don't overpopulate neighborhoods. That's what he's comparing his sister to. Like a dog, she was spayed by George Scudder's knife. Now it makes sense why Heavenly was saying she felt dead inside. The STD so wrecked her system, particularly her uterus, that she had to have a hysterectomy. That's when you have all your a woman's reproductive organs removed. So she feels dead inside because the part of her that can reproduce, the part of her that can bring new life, the part of her that can have children has been cut away. And now she doesn't have that opportunity. And according to Tom, it was Chance. So if this is all true, we can totally understand why Tom feels the way he does. If we didn't know the other things about Boss and his corruption and how he kept Heavenly and Chance apart when they were young, there'd be no question that Tom is in the right here to want to do bodily harm to Chance because of what he did to his little sister. Then we have the Boss Finley speech, and the stage directions are so important. So one of the things that happens is that Stuff and sometimes Miss Lucy, they go up to the fourth wall. So this is the name that stage productions and playwrights give to the imaginary wall that exists between the audience and the characters, right? So it's not a physical wall. So Stuff and Miss Lucy go up to turn on the TV, turn up the volume, turn it off. But the actual speech is being projected in that back wall. Remember where the cyclorama usually projects palm trees or the sounds of the ocean and the seagulls? Now it's projecting the speech like if someone was watching it on TV. So the fact it's in the back wall is symbolic, because now Boss is literally larger than life on the back screen, just as he's been larger than life in the life of Chance and Heavenly. And what really strikes in a guttural level, in a visceral level, to Chance is the fact that Heavenly is up there with Boss, almost giving her stamp of approval on his racist ideologies. Of course, he doesn't know. She had no other choice because Chance's life was actually being threatened. But to him, it's a punch in the gut to see the woman he loves next to this man he absolutely loathes. Miss Lucy doesn't like any of this either. She goes to turn down the volume, but Stuff will then turn it back on. And the speech is a really horrendous thing because you see Boss, the politician, in full display, and he wants to have it both ways when it comes to the recent incident of the poor African American man who was castrated. Because the environment right now in the South in the 1950s, as integration is trying to make headway, but a lot of people are resisting it, is very, very tense, and there's a lot of violence. So Boss is trying to, on the one hand, say, oh, it was deplorable. He repeats it twice. Deplorable, deplorable what they did to this poor man. But then also show support for the kind of people who approve of these kind of violent actions. He says, I understand the emotions. To protect by this violent emotion something that we hold sacred, our purity of our own blood. So clearly his sympathy for the African American man who was so violated is false. His sympathies lie with his white supremacist ideals that white people need to be kept pure and clean by maintaining segregation and not allowing integration. And notice the language he uses to describe the man. So even though he claims the man was innocent and didn't deserve this horrible thing happening to him, he was prowling the midnight streets. So instead of saying night, midnight, it's much darker. Prowling is this strong verb that seems to indicate someone who's out to do nefarious deeds. Like a thief prowls, a stalker prowls. So he's basically saying, well, he had it coming. What was he doing out late at night? So that shows his just below the surface racism that he was trying to cover up with sympathy. Chance obviously doesn't believe it. He knows he's a liar and he's totally against his supremacist ideals. And he still thinks that there's a way that he and Heavenly can run off that night, even though at this point in the play the audience doesn't see any way possible. And then the heckler comes in. So we knew this was coming because Miss Lucy set him up. He asked a question about the operation, and the stage directions indicate that the audience listening to this speech gasp. But what's more important is what happens to the heckler. So we don't see the heckler because this is happening in another room that's not on stage. All we see is Boss. But then onto the stage comes the heckler down the stairs as men throw him down and start beating him up. All while Boss is giving this speech comparing himself to Jesus, because he's saying that the Friday before, which would have been Good Friday, the Friday that Jesus died, there was this horrible incident where he references this horrible incident where he says he was a victim because a straw-stuffed effigy was made of him and burned. A straw-stuffed effigy, just like this picture, is a replica of a person in this crude manner by straw, and it's meant to be in protest. So he's saying he was a victim, but that like Jesus, he's going to come back, which is so hypocritical and so contradictory to his true nature, because as he's saying this speech, on the back wall, we see on the stage that the heckler is being beaten up. So that action shows the true Boss, the Boss that's corrupt and will stop at no means to get what he wants, even if it means violence, versus the Boss of the public persona who presents himself as pure, even like Jesus, when we know that's not true.